All right, so I'm going to get started. So just first of all, welcome back and welcome to anybody new today. I hope everyone is well and enjoying, at least where I am, it's sunny, which is a nice change from the kind of dreary weather and snow that we got yesterday. So this week we're going to be exploring the idea of mindful experiences. And as we've moved through this process, we're at week 4 now. We've likely engaged in a lot of mindful experiences on our own time. So as usual, I'd just like to check in and see if anyone wants to share a mindful moment that they had this week, or maybe something that they've learned, that they've incorporated into their life since they've started this group. Just any kind of happy, positive moment that they've had that they'd like to share. I can go first. I actually, even though it was a little bit cold and kind of rainy the past couple of days, I had my window open. I can't remember which day it was, maybe Monday, and it was rainy and kind of drizzly, but the birds were singing and they were so happy, and they were, I don't know if it was just amplified the way that the sound was coming into my room, but it was so loud, and it was just a nice moment because I was feeling kind of like it's gray and cold and rainy, and sometimes the mood can affect the weather can affect your mood more than you'd like. And so it was nice to hear the birds and to hear how happy they were, I guess, and playing, and that just made me smile. Mm. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Shopping now has changed into such a different experience than it did before, and we think about it so much more. And I can relate to the feeling of anxiety when you're shopping now. And yeah, that gripping of just noticing that tight grip that you were having, and then being able to loosen that up and notice that's great self-awareness and attention, right? That's awesome. So if no one else has anything else to share, which is totally fine, we're just getting started this morning. Um, much okay. No, it seems like a trend. Maybe that noticing piece is coming up a lot, and I think again that's the first step, right? Of starting to be able to notice your surroundings and notice what's happening in your life, rather than kind of always living in your head and missing those little moments that you might not have picked up on before. So that's great. I just wanted to check in, I guess, and for any of you who've been here for the past 4 weeks, like I said, we're halfway through, and this is week 4. And I guess I'm just wondering how everyone was feeling about the content, and if there was any takeaways from the first 3 weeks that we've spent together. And again, if you're new, that's okay. There's no, you don't need to be here every week, but just checking in for those of us who have been here every week, if there was any kind of major takeaways that you've had so far. I think something that I really like about this group so far is just the reminder for myself, and I feel like I'm on this journey with you guys, even though I try anyway to the best of my ability to practice mindfulness on a daily basis and in my job, and with clients. But I find this is such a nice reminder, and I really enjoy doing this group every week as again, like a midweek check in with myself, and to bring myself to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to practice these skills just as much as I'm preaching them, in a sense. So it's been a nice thing for me to do. So I hope that that's translating through to you guys. Hmm. Do you find that the five senses grounding technique has been helpful? Like, does it work for you? Great. I think it's a very simple but very powerful exercise to stop in the moment and just really bring yourself back to the present and just notice your senses. It really does take your mind off of everything that you're thinking and maybe worrying about. And it seems silly, and when you say it out loud, you're like, that's dumb, I don't want to do that. And I'm sure there's some resistance to that as well. But it's a great, yeah, it's a great simple exercise, and something that you can do no matter where you are. It's not like something that you have to stop and kind of pull out your phone, pull up a meditation, put your earbuds in, right? Like, it's a very simple but effective exercise that you can really do anywhere you are, no matter what you're doing. And it's something that doesn't make a show of it if you're kind of embarrassed of that kind of things too. Oh, your kids are doing it too. That's great. That's great to teach them that skill. That's I love to hear that. Thanks for sharing. All right. So today we are actually going to start with a little meditation. It's a short one. Just again, if anyone's feels anxious about that, that's okay. Like I said, it's really short. It's quite guided. And so just take it as you can. Do the best you can. There's no pressure to be amazing at it. If you're feeling a little head busy today, that's okay. Maybe this is just a good check-in for each of us. I know I'm looking forward to doing this too. So just take it as you can, and do the best you can, and we'll just get started. You can close your eyes if you feel comfortable to. I might turn my video off for just if I can do that. I'll just leave it on. So I'm going to close my eyes. Oh, come on. Oh, gosh, one sec. Technical difficulties. Here we go. Like I said, I'm going to take this moment to enjoy the meditation and just have this time. So I'll get started. Just let me open up my things again. All right. Hopefully this works.
The 3-minute breathing space. The 3-minute breathing space is a brief practice. It can be used when we find our thoughts or moving in a negative direction. The breathing space provides a way to step out of automatic pilot mode and reconnect with the present moment. Awareness. The first thing we do with this practice, because we want to come into the present moment quickly, is adjusting our posture. Make sure your back is straight and upright, but not stiff. Letting the body being present and awake. Now close your eyes. If this feels comfortable, take the first step of becoming aware of what is going on inside you right now. Become aware of what is going on in your mind right now. What thoughts are around? Try to simply notice them and watch them as mental events. So rather than trying to push them away or shut them out, just notice them. Perhaps saying, "Ah, there you are. That's how it is. This is what my mind is thinking right now." In the same way, notice what feelings arise. What physical sensations do you notice? Again, becoming aware of them. Simply noticing whatever is arising in this moment. So you have a sense of what is going on right now. Stepping out of automatic pilot, stepping out of the need to react. Gathering. The second step is to collect your awareness by focusing on a single act, the movement of the breath. So now really gather yourself, redirect your full attention to your breathing. Notice each in-breath and each out-breath as they come in and out. In and out. Think of your breath as an anchor that brings you into the present and helps you tune in to a sense of awareness and stillness. Notice the in-breath and out-breath. expanding. The third step is allowing your awareness to expand to the entire body, bringing a more spacious awareness to your experience. Letting the breath be present, but in the background. Slowly expand your field of awareness around your breathing. Bring your attention now to the entire length of your body, from head to toe. Start with your breathing, but then slowly include a sense of your body as a whole. Your posture and facial expression. Slowly and gently, when you're ready, open your eyes and return to the room.
So everyone can take a minute to just kind of come back. I chose that meditation in particular, one, because of the way that it was kind of explaining meditation, I guess, and not that we're all new to meditation, but I just really appreciated the guidance, I guess, and the different steps that they went through, and felt like it was a good one to just, to invite us into the practice today. I feel a lot more calm and at ease, and so I hope that you all enjoyed that as well. Did anyone have any issue getting into the moment today, or have any problems kind of getting into that mindful space? And it's okay if you did. All right. So we will move forward today with our topic, like I said, of and maybe if you did have a hard time getting into it, again, that's okay. Sometimes some moments are more difficult than others to get into that headspace, and that's totally fine. But maybe something to think about for afterwards, or maybe later today, is just to be more mindful today, because your mind is feeling a little bit more, more busy, if you say. So meditation and mindfulness they are two different things. I think meditation is a form of mindfulness. So meditation is a way to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness itself is a skill that can be practiced in many different fashions, like we've talked about, right? Where we can do meditation, you can just do breathing, you could do a mindful walk, you could do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. So there's many ways to practice mindfulness as a skill, whereas meditation is that practice of mindfulness, if that makes sense. So it's just a way of practicing that mindfulness, and those kind of getting your head, that attention retraining, meditation, the two words can get interchanged. The meditation is a way to practice that attention retraining, and to help you become more aware of those moments, and to also give yourself a minute, and your brain a minute, and your body a minute, to kind of get into that soothe system that we talked about last week, where you're able to bring your kind of rational mind back online, rather than kind of living in that survival mode. So it's taking the meditation is helping those mindfulness skills bring your mind back online, and to kind of calm your body down, and bring everything to a more neutral, happy state. Okay. So a core skill cacao skills, sorry, in talking about kindness as part of or mindfulness is being non-judgmental. So in mindfulness-based stress reduction, non-judging is one of the 7 attitudes considered to be the foundation of a mindfulness practice. So the others that would be considered a foundation would be patience, beginner's mind, trust, non-striving, acceptance, and letting go. So part of being mindful and part of this experience of developing mindfulness skills is about being able to be non-judgmental and to practice kindness towards others and yourself. It's not always really easy to be non-judging. In fact, the habits of judging and criticizing are really deeply ingrained in nearly everyone for a wide variety of reasons, right? I think one, you could have experiences in your childhood maybe, or just growing up or through your life where criticism is commonplace for you, and it's almost like a learned behavior. Or judging, I think, I kind of tend to think of it a lot now in the sense of comparison, right? So we're constantly judging ourselves and judging others in that comparison piece because we're trying to gauge where we fit in life, who we fit in with, what areas we're best at or least good at. Like, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, especially in social media and using those kind of things. So that judging piece is really common for us, and we get into that practice quite easily. And it's been long taught that the importance of building a foundation of mindfulness is upon that attitude of kindness and compassion. So kindness and compassion is a deep friendliness and welcoming, filled with forgiveness and unconditional love. It's a deep human capacity to always be present, at least potentially. Always being present would be challenging for anybody, but at least having that capacity to become present when it's necessary, right? So again, that attention retraining skill. So when we are able to have that awareness and we're able to become better at noticing, better at becoming more aware, we're more easily able to slip into present moment rather than slip out of it, if that makes sense. Because I think more often than not, we tend to slip out of presence more frequently, whereas when we practice these skills, we're able to slip into presence more quickly. It can be seen when one observes a mother, this compassion and kind of kindness that we're talking about can be observed when we're thinking of a mother tending to their child, right? That compassion and care that we have for our kids is the kind of compassion and care that we all should strive for ourselves and for other people in our lives, right? Because it's such an unconditional, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a selfless kind of care, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. So when that kind of care that we give to our children is often not reserved for us or not reserved for the other people in our lives, but yet we can give that to kids, so we have the capacity for it. We know we can do it. It's just about the context and maybe applying that skill to ourselves. So kindness and compassion is something that can really help us develop mindfulness our skills and develop our mindfulness practice. So all we have to do is really allow those feelings of kindness and compassion to be part of paying attention mindfully. So it's easier said than done. And when we can't really notice that sense of self-criticism that we might have, and we don't really have that awareness of how critical we can become on ourselves, and if that criticism is largely unconscious, it's very difficult, and that kindness and compassion that we're talking about might be really difficult for some more than others to develop. And I guess I'm curious, like, if people in the group can relate to that idea of really high self-criticism, or if they tend to feel that they don't notice the self-criticism and it may be happening more under the surface. Mm, very self-critical. Mm. So I think it's interesting because I think as this journey progresses and as we start to become more aware of mindfulness and what these different topics are, that own worst enemy feeling is really tough. And I think maybe it might be challenging sometimes to notice that how critical you might be on yourself, because maybe you never noticed that before or never really took stock of it. But I think, again, making yourself aware of it can actually help you in the moment. I had, I don't know if I've shared this before, but I was on a walk, and I normally really love going for walks. It makes me feel really good, and it's the sun's out, and I can focus on the sounds that I'm hearing, and etc. And I could hear my thought, or well, I couldn't hear them in the moment, but reflecting on it, but I started to feel really icky, and I couldn't get in the moment, and I couldn't feel good and enjoy the walk and enjoy the present moment. And I was kind of like, why am I feeling so off? I just don't feel myself. And then I started picking up on the thoughts that I was having and the self-criticism that was coming up. And I realized in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, the reason I feel so bad is because I'm criticizing myself so harshly, just so unconsciously and so under the surface. And it was bringing it to awareness and noticing it that helped me instantly feel better. So it can actually help us when we are able to identify, well, I'm feeling off. Why is it that I'm feeling off? And then maybe pick up on some of those things that we're saying to ourselves, those criticisms that we tend to say to ourselves on a daily basis. It's just part of our natural internal dialogue. And when we notice that, it takes away their power in some sense, and we can change the narrative or say something kind to ourselves, or it alleviates some of that pressure. So sitting in kindness and compassion can help support you through the impacts of really deep habits that we might have. So habits of judging and criticism, and being intentional about giving yourself permission to be kind and compassionate towards yourself supports you in that skill of being non-judgmental. So when we're self-critical, we aren't giving ourselves permission to be kind to ourselves. And maybe that idea of permission to be kind to ourselves is one that we've never really thought of before, because rationally, I think we all can relate. We know that we should be kind to ourselves, right? But in reality, we're not kind to ourselves. And again, that's for whatever reason, it might be ingrained in us. It might be something that we were taught. It might be, I like to phrase it in the sense of, oftentimes like 80% of what we think about ourselves isn't actually our own voice. It's the voices of other people that we've met throughout our lives or who were important to us. And it's the things that they have said to us that we've internalized and taken on as our own dialogue. So some of the things, the criticisms that we may have about ourselves don't actually come from us. We don't believe that about ourselves, but yet we tell ourselves it all the time. So it's just interesting to actually sit back and maybe ask yourself, well, where did that thought come from? Where did I learn that criticism? Why do I feel that way about myself? Asking yourself those reflective questions can be helpful to identify where those criticisms come from, and maybe take that power away from those statements to know that that's not my voice, that's somebody else, and I can let that go because it's not mine. So like I said, self-criticism is a really tough one. And I think we can all relate to that idea of maybe, it came from your family. Maybe your parents have always been really critical of you. And I think there's a bias there of that criticism helps you be better. It helps you improve, right? But again, when we're if we look at the mother-child thing again, or parent-child, when you're trying to encourage your children to be better, to teach them things, you don't teach them through criticism, you teach them through praise and encouragement and support, right? So if we can kind of start to talk to ourselves and teach ourselves like we would a child, it can vastly change how we speak to ourselves. And it can also change how we treat ourselves too. So not only can this practice of looking at our own internal thoughts and our own internal dialogue can help us the way we think about ourselves, but it can also change how we feel towards ourselves and also the way that we act towards ourselves. And in terms of the idea of maybe self-care or practicing those mindfulness skills that maybe sometimes we feel when we're having a stressed day and we're just not feeling ourselves, the last thing we want to do is to put that time and energy into practice those skills that we know will help. And I'm guilty of this as well. When we feel overwhelmed, sometimes the last thing we want to do is to do the things that we know will feel good, because it feels like it's going to take a ton of energy. But when we actually do it, it feels so good. So on that topic of how we treat ourselves, I have a question for everyone, in that when we start to think negatively of ourselves, how do you tend to behave? When, if you've ever reflected on that point, like when we start to have negative thoughts about ourselves, how do we act in response to those thoughts? Angry. Yep. I was going to say, I think for me, I get frustrated or irritable when I start to think poorly of myself. I tend to be a little bit more snippy when people are talking to me and they're not even saying anything mean or anything, but because I'm so feeling so critical of me, I take that angry feeling that I'm having on myself and I kind of project it out. And I think, that sad and withdrawn, exhausted. It is exhausting to talk critically to ourselves, isn't it? No patience, absolutely. On the flip side of that question, have you ever treated yourself as someone deserving of fun and recognition for your achievements? Or do you tend to neglect yourself and talk down to yourself and minimize your achievements? Is it a foreign concept to imagine talking to yourself like you are deserving of fun and recognition for your achievements? Is that a crazy thing to think about? Taught not to brag. That's a really, really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Um, yeah, that concept of minimizing ourselves, it's as a way of being humble, I think is a really interesting one, um, because bragging is very different from acknowledging our accomplishments, right? But yet we feel that if we acknowledge ourselves, if we say, you know what, I did really good today in that presentation at work, or you know what, I had a really good mom moment today and I was really present with my kids and we had a great time, or I don't know, just anything, right? I made an amazing meal last night for my family, right? Acknowledging those things is hard. And we feel like we're bragging, or we feel like we're being really cocky. But in reality, we're just acknowledging the good things about ourselves rather than minimizing those things and focusing on maybe the things that we might struggle with. Taught not to. That I've known about that, but I've never really put it in that context of that might be a part of the challenge of self-criticism, is that because we're kind of ingrained to not brag and to be humble, and that's a value, we value being humble, that makes it hard to to be kind to ourselves. Hmm. So again, that bragging idea, or that feeling like we're boasting, or being really cocky or arrogant in some way, um, because and again, that I guess that kind of goes to that conversation. It's making me think about boundaries, right? And if this person is not able to celebrate your successes with you, are they somebody um, that you really want to be sharing stuff with, right? Is that, and maybe that boundary has to be a little bit more firm, right? If they can't celebrate you and appreciate the successes that you're having, I would question that friendship a little bit and say, you know what, why? And maybe it's not about you, and maybe that person is struggling a lot and they can't, hearing other people's joy makes them feel bad about themselves, but that's not about you, that's about them, right? That's not yours to carry, that's theirs. So, and it's unfortunate that we have experiences like that, because it does make us fearful of sharing our positives, and it makes us worried about being honoring ourselves in those moments, and being open about how we're proud of ourselves, because, and we should be, but yet we feel guilty about the fact that we want to share those things because other people might not have it, or they might be having a bad day. But I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I think, yeah, and I think maybe that idea of kindness and self-criticism for that person that struggles to accept your accomplishments and struggles to celebrate your accomplishments comes from their deep self-criticism, right? And their struggle with their own stuff. And that's not to say that can't change, but it just kind of points to maybe some work that they need to be doing on their own end, rather than to, again, project that out like we just talked about, right? When we're feeling bad about ourselves, we tend to project that, and that's kind of sounds like what your friend was doing in that moment, rather than being able to sit with you in that happiness and be like, this is great, I'm happy for you. Yeah, great conversation. Thank you, everybody. Another question. How many of us can relate to the idea of being able to pick out our own flaws, and kind of pick ourselves apart, but really struggle to notice our positive qualities and the, yeah, the things we like about ourselves? I think I can relate to the idea of, kind of, it's like an automatic reaction, right? Where we tend to pick out our flaws. We tend to pick out, when we look in the mirror in the morning, first thing in the morning, right? What do you say to yourself when you first look in the mirror, right after you wake up and you're starting to get ready for the day? What do you say to yourself, right? What do you pick out first? And do you allow that to affect your mood for the day, or do you change that? Do you speak kindly to yourself, right? It's a powerful thing to imagine, especially as women. I think most of us in this group are women. I apologize if there's some men in here. But for as women, when we get up in the morning and we sit down, and whether we take a shower, we kind of wash our face and we're starting to get ready for the day, we're sitting and we're looking at ourselves for 20, 30 minutes. And sometimes that can be a very daunting thing, because yeah, like things like you need a haircut, or your skin's looking a little rough today, or you look really tired, look at those bags under your eyes, or I wish my chin was smaller, I wish my nose was smaller, I wish my eyes were bigger, all those different things that we have. Like, what do we say to ourselves? And that can be a really powerful moment to take a minute to say, I I love you. I appreciate you. I think you are beautiful no matter what you look like. And if we can start to think about even simple things like that in the morning, and rather than starting the day by picking out our flaws, maybe we start the day by saying an affirmation to ourselves, like, you are beautiful and you are worthy. And saying that instead of picking apart our face in the mirror as we're getting ready for work. I wonder how much that would change the tone of your day and the tone of your week. It would be an interesting experiment, because like I said, as women, we tend to do that. And that's a part of our daily routine that we never really thought about, and how that might affect us in the day. Hmm. And I think something that's important too is, especially in those moments, is not to always focus on the physical, right? Is to focus on the positive qualities that you have that have absolutely nothing to do with your body. And I guess maybe that was one example, right, of that moment where you're in the mirror for the first time in the morning. But yeah, focusing on a quality that has nothing to do with your physical aspects at all, because that's only part of who you are. And to focus on, yeah, what you bring to the table, what you're proud of yourself for, what you've accomplished in your life, and to love yourself for those things. And maybe that's a challenge, I guess, I'm going to put on everyone for this week, is to notice when you get in the mirror in the morning, when you're trying to get ready. And maybe some of us don't even get ready right now because it's quarantine, and and we don't really have anywhere to go, and that's okay. But when you do get into the mirror and you just spend that 5 minutes there, just see what you say to yourself. What thoughts come up? What are the first things you think of? And maybe change that dialogue, and yeah, say some kind things to yourself. All right. So having compassion emphasizes some self-compassion, sorry, emphasizes some key topics. So the first one being awareness. So being attentive or sensitive to the fact that some sort of suffering is occurring. So now suffering could mean distress, struggle with emotional pain, mental pain, physical pain, or maybe some of all of those things, right? So having that awareness is being able to pick out, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm having some sort of emotional pain. I'm having some sort of mental pain today. What is that? And being sensitive to the fact that we are struggling in that moment. The next part is normalizing. So recognizing and that experiencing this sort of pain is a universal thing, and that we all experience pain to some varying degrees throughout our lifetime, and we all have our own struggles, and we're all dealing with our own stuff, right? And the fact that we experience pain isn't our fault or some sort of failing on our part, and we're not to blame for our pain, and we're not alone in that pain. Right? So thinking of normalizing that pain for yourself, and instead of berating ourselves for it and saying, oh, like here we go again, another day where I'm feeling sad, or why can't I just feel better? Or like whatever sort of tone you take for yourself, you're not to blame for that pain, and you're not alone in that pain either. Sorry, kind of some loud noises happening. Sorry. So normalizing that pain for yourself, and allowing yourself to feel that, and not feeling guilty about the fact that you have that, because everyone experiences pain or distress in some way, whether we like it or not, right? That's a universal thing. It's a universal human experience to feel upset, to feel angry, to feel frustrated, to feel down, right? These are all things that we all have in common, but yet we don't talk about it, and no one wants to hear about the bad stuff. So we've developed this kind of like shying away from the normal, which is having a range of emotions. After normalizing, then it's about kindness. It's about not shying away, like I was talking about, not shying away or ignoring that pain, but meeting it with a kindness and care and warmth and concern. Just as if you can imagine that pain, maybe you're feeling really depressed one day, and then maybe that depression comes to you, and instead of being angry because you're feeling that, maybe think of it, the depression, might be getting a little weird, but imagine that depression as a child coming to you and saying, I'm feeling really sad today. What would you say to a child if your own kids came up to you and said, I'm feeling really sad today, I'm really struggling, and I'm having a hard time? How would you speak to your child? And can you do that for yourself when you're feeling sad? Can you give yourself kindness and care and warmth and concern, rather than being angry at yourself for feeling that way? So lastly, it's alleviation. It's focusing our energy on the ways to alleviate pain. So this may provide us further comfort and caring, and helpful perspectives regarding what it is that we're struggling with, and having the strength and courage to take other actions necessary to address the problem that we're facing. So maybe if you're having a sad day, maybe it's about making yourself a tea, wrapping yourself in a blanket, and just giving yourself some nurturing and some care. Maybe it's taking a long bath. Maybe it's calling a friend and feeling open and saying, I'm having a hard day. So self-compassion is all about doing these 4 things for ourselves when we're struggling. That is, so being aware of our pain, whatever that may be, whatever it happens in that moment, understanding that while this pain is really hard to feel, this is a normal human experience, and we're not failing because we're feeling that way, and we're not alone in it. This is, like I said, it's a human experience. And it involves directing feelings of kindness and care towards ourselves. So just as we might do for a friend or for a child who might be struggling, and then focusing that attention and energy on how we might improve on our pain and help ourselves through this struggle that we're facing. So the need to receive care and nurturing evolved as a strong need within all mammals, including humans. So being cared for from birth is vital for our survival. If we don't have that, we don't survive, and we struggle to thrive. So, and unfortunately, some of us might have experienced what we might call adverse childhood experiences. And as a result of these adversities, our stress response and threat system are overactive. And some of us, maybe all the time, are constantly feeling at threat. But on the other hand, the success of human race and humans in general is based on us receiving care and being motivated to care for others. So this can be reflected in what we're experiencing right now in the pandemic, is that we're all experiencing this crazy thing that's happening. And right now, self-compassion can be something that benefits all of us in some way, because of providing that sense of kindness and care to others and for ourselves, for going through a hard time and for struggling. When self-compassion works well and we work together to support each other, we flourish and we develop resilience and we come together. And those are all really important things as a whole that we need to have. So this we don't really need to hear as much. But as we become more practiced at using mindfulness for breathing and body sensations and routine daily activities, we can learn to be mindful of our thoughts and feelings, to become observers, and then accepting of these thoughts and ideas. So the result is that we hopefully we have less distressing feelings, and it increases our ability to enjoy our lives. So with mindfulness, even the most disturbing sensations, feelings, thoughts, expressions, experiences can be viewed from a wider perspective. And it's more of a passing event in the mind rather than us, and rather than it being necessarily true. So it helps us develop a more broad sense of the situation that's going on, and we don't blame ourselves. We rather just understand what's happening. So when we're more practiced in using mindfulness, we can use this in times of intense distress by becoming mindful of what's actually happening in the moment as an observer, using mindful breathing, focusing our attention on our breathing, noticing those distressing thoughts that we might be having, and recognizing them as just thoughts, kind of breathing with them, rather than having the thought and then thinking that it's true and then kind of going down that rabbit hole of believing them. So we allow our thoughts to happen without arguing with them or believing them, or really, yeah, like I said, following that rabbit hole. If those thoughts might be too loud or too strong, then we can move our attention back into our breath and back into the body and the sounds around us, and we can develop that skill of attention retraining and bringing ourselves back into the present moment despite the thoughts and the loop that we might be playing in our heads. So the example that we have here, which is why I had an ocean playing in the background here, I'll play it again. It's to think of your mind as the surface of a lake or an ocean, right? So there's always going to be waves on the water. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small, sometimes the water can be calm, sometimes it might be more choppy, right? And sometimes the changes in what's happening are happening under the surface and they're almost imperceptible, right? But the waves and the water is being kind of churned up by wind, and which comes and goes, and it varies in direction and intensity. And just as those winds of stress and change in our lives stir up waves in our mind, it's a very similar concept, right? So there's lots of factors that affect the ocean and affect the movement of the waves and what's happening in the ocean. Same with our minds, right? Depending on what's happening that day and the stress that we may be having, or change happening, or other experiences, it can stir up different things in our heads. So is it possible for us to find shelter from that kind of wind or that stress that agitates our mind? And whatever we might do to prevent them, the winds of life in our mind are going to constantly be blowing and constantly changing and evolving. And can we, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, can we tolerate that change? And can we tolerate that uncertainty and allow ourselves to flow with the changes that are happening as they happen? And again, rather than stopping and really taking hold of those things and being worried about them, can we allow them to happen and allow ourselves to flow with that, and know that we can handle it when it comes up? There's a quote by John Kabat-Zinn, who's a mindfulness teacher, It says you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf, right? So we can't stop what's happening to us. We can't necessarily be in control all the time, but we can learn to cope and to be flexible with the changes and the things that are happening for us. Okay. So for most people, being compassionate towards themselves and it therefore activates our soothe system, like we talked about last week, I think. It doesn't come naturally sometimes. So this may be because of early life experiences where our threat system was overactive and we were always in survival mode and defense mode. And that lack of awareness that we talked about last week in terms of not being able to get out of that kind of survival mode and that fight or flight mode is related to being not mindful and our thinking brain shutting down. So the opposite of self-compassion, as we've been talking about, is that self-criticism, which is so easily seems to roll off our tongue and kind of be our natural way of thinking. So it involves that internal self-talk of being really negative and berating ourselves and being really tough on ourselves. So once that threat system is active in our brain, this self-criticism is very likely to come up, and it's that kind of default mode and default thinking style, and these can be really cruel. Our thoughts can be really awful, and we can be really cold and harsh and attacking, and we reprimand ourselves and punish ourselves in some ways for a lot of the things that we do. And this can happen to varying degrees. Some days it may be really strong. Some days it may be more quiet. It depends. It depends on the days. It depends on what's happening in that moment. So you might tend to hear people refer to themselves as stupid or an idiot when they make a really small mistake. And this could be even milder. Might be the more mild end of that self-criticism. But other people might routinely speak to themselves super harshly and really abuse themselves to a certain degree in terms of what they're saying. And it may go beyond just like, why'd you do that? You're so silly, or you're so stupid. It may be really bad and really toxic in your own mind. There's something that can come along with self-criticism is that self-loathing or self-hatred or self-disgust, where we believe that we don't deserve to be treated any better than the way that we're treating ourselves. I'm going to read off a list of different statements, and I'd be curious to know how many of us say these things to ourselves on a daily basis. I'm an idiot. What a moron. You're useless and pathetic. I'm so hopeless. You shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? You should have known better. I never get it right. You may as well give up now. And there's no point, why bother? So can anyone relate to saying these things and to on a daily basis maybe? Right. A lot of these statements, right, are I am statements, and they are a first person statement, but and maybe this is the more common statement that you tend to give yourself. But other people kind of maybe refer to that other perspective, like a second person perspective. So the you are statements, you are so silly, you're so stupid. So it depends on the situation, I guess. But it also involves when we do these things, when we say these statements or have these criticisms, like why try, or you should have known better, right? When we have those, we're actually having unhelpful thinking styles at the same time. And I think we talked a little bit about some of these last time in terms of we're labeling, right? When we are struggling and we're going through a hard time, and we're criticizing ourselves, we're labeling ourselves that stupid word, or you're a moron, or you never get it right? We're labeling ourselves and making global and derogatory statements about ourselves on the basis of a behavior in one circumstance or one situation. So rather than taking a whole stock of how we act normally, we berate ourselves for that one mistake that we made, and we're labeling ourselves as a whole based on that one mistake. There's also those shoulds, right? Those should statements, shoulding ourselves, which just sounds funny when you say it that way. So using should statements to put unreasonable demands on or pressure on ourselves. Like, I should have known better. I should know how to do this. Like, I should be better at it, right? All those things. Well, why? Someone recently said, I should know how to handle this pandemic, or I should know how to deal with this. I'm like, have you ever gone through a pandemic like this before, right? Like, how are we supposed to know how to get through a pandemic when this is the first time we're all experiencing it? But yet we feel that if we're struggling through it, then we should know how to do it, or we should have knowledge, and we should be able to have the skills to make it through this perfectly fine. And it's like, well, but no, we've never gone through it before. If you don't know, how are you supposed to know? But those should statements are really strong sometimes. And maybe over another one that's unhelpful is those overgeneralizations. So taking a negative instance and concluding that this applies to everything. So maybe I don't know, something simple like you had a bad meal, you cooked a bad meal. Well, now that overgeneralizes to I'm a bad cook, rather than I cooked a bad meal, right? So when we tend to be really self-critical, we end up getting into these cognitive distortions and overgeneralizations, or labeling, or shoulding, those kind of things. So in order to be able to respond to ourselves more compassionately, we need to be aware of what we are struggling with in the first place. And we need to be aware of when our mind leaps into these self-critical thinking styles and causes us to manifest that struggle even more. And it compounds that struggle. So slowing down in order to see the whirlwind direction that we might be falling into, or that kind of spiral or that loop, and being able to pull ourselves out of that. And when we slow down, we might be able to become more aware of when we get into that mind frame of the self-criticism. We can if we slow down and we are employing our mindfulness skills that we're developing here, we might be able to make choices and to try something different and try a more compassionate approach when you notice that self-criticism, rather than allowing it to just continue on. Maybe using those mindfulness skills to say, hey, that was not a nice thing to say to myself. Why did I say that? And to say no, and say the opposite, or say something compassionate in response to it. So again, doing these things that we've been talking about the past 4 weeks, right? Meditating, breathing, attention retraining, practicing affirmations. So all of these skills that we've been practicing are not only helpful for just your general mind state, it can actually be helpful to target this specific thing in terms of targeting that self-criticism and learning and training yourself to think differently, or to speak to yourself more kindly. So that is all I have for us today. I hope you guys took something out of this and it was helpful. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat and I'll answer as many as I can. But otherwise, I will leave us here today. Like I said, your workbook for this week is all about self-compassion, and really thinking about self-compassion and trying to develop more compassionate thinking styles. So if you are somebody who struggles with that, this might be a workbook to really look at and to think about. So if you haven't gotten it, make sure to get that from the chat before we end the webinar today. And otherwise, it was great getting to be with you again today, this morning. I hope you all are well, and I hope to see you all next week for week 5. That's I like that one. The changing shoulds to shit. So stop shitting on myself. That's awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. I think that's really good self-awareness, Cindy, in terms of those, noticing those self-limiting thoughts versus, and that self-doubt, and really identifying where did that come from, right? That came from an early life experience that you had about being labeled. And again, going back to that idea of labeling, right? But really it's a criticism, but it's a labeling one. And you're the nice one. You were labeled as the nice one. So you took that on as, well, I can't really be more than that. I am the nice one, right? It's almost like you couldn't get out of that label for yourself. Hmm. Right. You don't have, just because, hmm, I would venture to say you are quite smart, but because of your experiences and because of that label that was put on you, that your brother was the smart one and you were the nice one, you stopped paying attention to your own intelligence, because you were paying more attention to being nice because that's what you were getting praised for. So by not paying attention to your own intelligence and focusing on the niceness, you were getting, I guess, that validation and that praise for the things that you were doing good. So it developed a kind of like a bias towards that niceness. But it doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means that maybe you weren't paying attention as much to that or putting as much emphasis on it. Hmm. Exactly. And I hope that some of this information can be, helpful for you to continue on that self-reflection and to continue to work through some of those biases and those internal dialogues that we have. And I'm sure all of us have our own version of that same story. Mm. And it's interesting. I think a lot of examples are coming up with siblings, which is interesting. And I think we can, again, if we have siblings, we can relate to the idea of being compared to our siblings, right? Especially if you're the younger sibling, or maybe even if you are the older sibling, right? We're always compared in some way to our siblings, which it's not great. It doesn't feel the best. And if out of anyone, we shouldn't be compared to our siblings, right? They're just, we shouldn't, but that's a should. And it happens. And those make it even harder, I feel like, because they are your siblings, so you care about them and it's your family system and you want to please or to feel good about your family system, and yet we get compared, and that's hard. Gender stereotypes, yep. Yeah, definitely. In relation to that idea of intelligence. Yeah. But again, if we can identify where those kind of thoughts came from, we can identify that that's a biased belief, right? That's something that's not based in reality, because just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're any less smart. And you might have intelligence in many other ways that your brother might not, right? So it's just acknowledging that there are these stereotypes and that, maybe some of them are biased. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts to share as we wrap up today, week 4, halfway through? Yes. Be kind to you. I like that. Right. So I appreciate everyone acknowledging some of their strengths today, and also really having self-reflection and being able to notice maybe some internal dialogue that they've had that wasn't always helpful, and where those things come from. I think that's amazing. And I really appreciate you sharing it with me. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. Like Cindy said, be kind to you, and practice that self-compassion, self-kindness, and mute that self-criticism. And I will hope to see you all next week, okay? See you later.